Okay, welcome, welcome. Hi,
Hi.
Rachel.
Hi, how are you?
About a minute, okay? Okay, so welcome everyone, not only here on Zoom, but also on Dorisha Live. So good to be together again, and this is the eighth session of Halakhah for the Ages, reading Responsa from a Bygone era with Dr. Rachel Furst. Um, just a couple words about how we run the class. If you're receiving an invitation to become a panelist here on Zoom, it just means that if you accept it, you'll be able to unmute yourself to ask questions and make comments during the class. It will give you the option to show us your face if you wish, or keep your video off. Please stay muted when you're not actively speaking. I will also help mute as needed so we avoid background noise. And just remember to always press unmute when you're ready to speak again. You can also engage during the class through the chat here on Zoom or as a comment on Facebook if you're watching us live. And with that, I'll turn this to you, Rachel.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction as always, and welcome back to all prior participants. Welcome to any new participants who might have joined us this week. We are, as you heard, we're already in week 8. Next week is going to be the last week of this course. So we're kind of moving towards the end of our time together. And up until now, what we've been doing is most weeks we've been focusing on one particular responsum that I used as an example, as a sample for discussing some of the, well, obviously the case at hand, and also some of the features of medieval responsa, which has been the focus of our studies this semester. We're going to be doing something similar this week. However, this week we're going to be looking at a responsum that is actually going to take us into next week as well. So we're going to be looking at one responsum today that we're going to be looking at some responses to that responsum, I should say, next week. And at the end of next week, I'm also going to devote to save some time for conclusions and wrap up and some broader thoughts about the theme of our course and some of the takeaways that I would suggest, or that you would suggest, ways of pulling together the various things we've been discussing over the course of our semester. I also, just as far as orientation is concerned, the past few weeks, the responsa that we've been looking at have been focused on ways in which Halakhah and the Halakhic decisors, the Halakhic scholars writing the responsa, related to and interacted with and engaged with various aspects of local non-Jewish law. And because the focus of our discussions has been responsa from medieval Ashkenaz, or the German-speaking lands, we focused on the way that they were embedded, these responsa and the respondents were embedded in their broader medieval German surroundings. Today, we're going to be looking at a different topic, one which still keeps us in medieval Ashkenaz, but which I believe has some resonances with contemporary events. We're going to be looking at a series of responsa, again, one focusing on one today and on some others next week, that deal with a particular case of captivity of a young Jewish woman who was taken captive, and of some of the halachic issues that arose in light of her captivity. And I think again, we're going to be looking at a very particular case from medieval Ashkenaz. But one of the questions that I had wanted us to think about more broadly in this course is the extent to which these halachic cases from the 12th, the 13th century in Ashkenaz, the ways in which they cast halachic shadows, the ways in which they left footprints in the halachic record, in the halachic tradition, whether these were decisions that were particular to their time and place, or whether they had any implications for longer term halachic development. And again, as we move towards the end of our course, I hope that this particular case will be a poignant and relevant way for us to engage with that question. You, I believe, should have received the handout. If not, I believe Evie put it up in the chat, or we'll put it up in the chat momentarily, so that you have the responsum we're going to be looking at. Before we take a look at the responsum itself, I do want to share with you briefly my PowerPoint in order to, as usual, give us a little bit of chronological and geographical orientation. The responsum that we're going to be looking at today was written by Rabbi Isaac ben Moshe, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Moshe, or Isaac ben Moses, or Zarua. Now, we have seen a few responsa by someone named Chaim ben Isaac or Zarua, who was in fact the son of the respondent that we're going to be focusing on today. So we're actually moving back a little chronologically. We're moving somewhat backwards in time, right? You can see on the timeline in front of you now that I marked the probable date of death of Chaim or Zarua. Again, we believe he died around 1315. His father died when Chaim was probably quite a young child. His father died probably sometime around the late 1250s, maybe 1260. He's not marked on this timeline, I apologize, but you can just place him somewhere in the middle of the 13th century there. And the incident that we are going to be discussing today took place in 1241. Right? So Rabbi Isaac ben Moses or Zarua, father of Chaim or Zarua, who was living in Würzburg at the time of the event in question. And we're going to see that that's significant because there's a local Würzburg dimension to the story that we're going to be seeing. He is the respondent we're going to be focusing on today. Next week, we're going to be looking at some of the responses of his colleagues to the very same incident. Right? So this is also an opportunity for us to expand a little bit our discussion of some of the technicalities of the responsa literature. Up until now, we've seen responsa that involved a questioner and a respondent, and we spoke a little bit about the relationship that generated, or the types of correspondence that generated these responsa. This time around, we're going to get to see how the responsa functioned in a slightly broader context, as real correspondence, not only between the questioners and the respondents, but sometimes between various different rabbinic colleagues who were called upon somewhat in parallel to respond to the same situation. So again, this case is going to give us an opportunity to see that. Geographically, here's our map again of the medieval German lands. And this time I circled for you, you can see right in the middle of the map, the city of Frankfurt and the city of Würzburg. Würzburg we have encountered previously. That was the seat of a bishopric, an important city in medieval Germany. Frankfurt was actually, at this point in time, again, mid-13th century, Frankfurt was already a substantial city, but it was, although today we think of Frankfurt as being one of Germany's most important cities, at the time it was not necessarily. Some of these other cities were more significant. And interestingly, we don't actually hear much, virtually nothing about a Jewish community in Frankfurt until the incident that we're about to discuss, which occurred in light of I'll call it a pogrom, but it was an attack on the Jewish community in Frankfurt that really decimated the community, right? What we hear about from some non-Jewish sources, incidentally, is that in the year 1241, there was some kind of altercation between the Jewish residents of Frankfurt and the non-Jewish residents of Frankfurt. Apparently, there were already about 200 plus Jews living in Frankfurt at this time, which, as I've mentioned in the past, that's already a sizable Jewish community for medieval Germany, because some of the communities in medieval Germany really number just, a handful of families. So 200 plus people is already, significant. So it's kind of curious that we do not hear anything about this community prior, or anything significant about this community prior to the events in question. We also don't exactly know what precipitated this this attack on the Jewish community in 1241. From the few archival and chronicle sources that we have, meaning non-Jewish sources that we have, it sounds like there was some altercation that involved a Jew who had converted to Christianity. A Jew converted, some of his fellow Jews tried to stop him from converting, something along those lines. But again, we don't know exactly what transpired or what took place. In any event, what ended up happening was that the Jewish community was attacked, and the Jewish community seems to have set fire to their own homes in the course of responding to that attack. Again, I say all of this, with question marks, because it's not clear exactly how reliable the sources were. These sources were authored by parties to the dispute, which means that we always need to read them a bit skeptically. What we do know from internal Jewish sources, interestingly, everything that I've said thus far is from Christian sources. From Jewish sources, we hear about this event in its aftermath. More specifically, we hear about this event in the series of Responsa that we're going to be looking at today and next week, which focus not on the incident itself, right? These are Responsa, so they were triggered by a Halakhic question. The Halakhic question was not about the incident per se, but the Halakhic question arose in the aftermath of the incident, and it surrounded the personal status of one of the 20 plus survivors of this attack, Jewish survivors of this attack, who had been taken, all of those 20 plus survivors of the attack, right? So again, more than 200 people were killed, about 20 people managed to survive, and they survived because they were taken by local Christians and forcibly baptized, forcibly converted to Christianity. Now, one of those survivors was a young woman who, prior to the attack on the Frankfurt Jewish community, had been betrothed, that is, engaged to be married, to a young man from Würzburg, right? So here's where Würzburg comes in. Now, I think we discussed this in one of the early weeks of the course. Today, when we talk about Jewish marriage is comprised of two steps, or two ceremonies that today we conflate into one: the kiddushin and the nisuin. The kiddushin is the formal legal betrothal that today is followed immediately by the Sheva Brachot, which represent the wedding ceremony. But up until around the time that we're discussing, right, up until around the 13th century, those two ceremonies were distinct, and they usually took place at two separate points in time, right? If you read about Jewish marriage, for example, in the Talmud, it's clear that there were two separate ceremonies: the kiddushin, or the legal betrothal, and then the nisuin, or the actual marriage. And oftentimes, again, in Talmudic times, they seem to have taken place oftentimes up to a year apart. That was the case through the early medieval period as well. But around the time that we're discussing, the Tosfot report that it first in medieval Ashkenaz and then elsewhere, it became standard practice to conjoin those two ceremonies and to carry them out one after the other, the way that we do until today. Now, why is that of any significance? Well, the kiddushin, I call them a legal betrothal, and that is because it's not like an engagement today, which might have social weight to it, but doesn't usually have legal significance to it. The kiddushin part of the wedding ceremony has significant legal weight to it, because after that point in time, after the kiddushin has been performed, that man and woman are considered bound to one another. such that if the woman, let's say, commits adultery, it would be called adultery, right? She is already legally bound to her future husband. They're not yet living together. They haven't yet been married, but they are already legally bound to one another. And that's the situation that we have to keep in mind as the backdrop to the halachic question we're going to be contending with today. The young woman under discussion, again, from the community of Frankfurt, who had been taken captive and forcibly converted to Christianity, had been, prior to these incidents, betrothed legally with Kiddushin to a young man from Würzburg. So they weren't living together yet when these incidents occurred. He was, safe in Würzburg, and she, unfortunately, was in the community under attack in Frankfurt. And she was taken captive. And the halachic question that we're going to be contending with today is, how does her captivity, right, the fact that she was taken and forcibly, it's captivity sort of combined with this forcible conversion, how, if at all, does that affect her personal status? Are there going to be any implications for her ability to continue with these marriage proceedings? And I'm going to pause this screen share now, and I want to take a look at the responsum, begin to read the responsum today, because it's going to fill in some of the details of the incident. That's the point in time that we are entering the story. Okay, we're entering the story after this woman has been taken captive. I'm sorry, I should add one step. We're entering the story at the point in time that she has somehow managed to escape her captivity and now wants to continue with her marriage proceedings. But what we're going to see is that the young man in question, her intended groom, no longer wants to marry her, and in fact claims that he is halachically prohibited from marrying her. Okay, that's the backdrop to what we're going to see today. And now let's take a look at our responsum itself. So bear with me for one moment as I get up our next screen. Sorry, hold on just one moment. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, wait one moment. I apologize. This is not, do you, okay, I hope that you now, I'm not sure that, I'm sorry. Let me try that. Let me try that one more time. Please bear with me. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, now I believe it will be the right one. Okay, here we go. Okay. Now, as I mentioned already a few times, we know about this incident and we can piece together the details of the story on the basis of this responsum written by Rabbi Isaac Or Zarua, that we're about to see, as well as on the basis of a handful of additional responsa, some of which we're going to take a look at next week, that were written by his colleagues. Right? So today we're going to be focusing on his version of the story. Some of the details that we'll see next week emerge from other responsa, some of which corroborate the way that Isaac Or Zarua narrates the story, and some of which actually conflict with the way that he narrates the story. And so next week, we're going to have to ask ourselves about the significance of the way that respondents narrate the events about which they were asked to rule on halachically, because we're going to see that the way they shape the stories obviously has a very significant bearing on the way that they rule, and vice versa. Sometimes, I'm going to claim at least, that the way a respondent rules halachically on a particular incident really dictates the way in which he crafts the story of the events, or the way that he understands, I should say, the events that he is asked to rule on. So let's begin. Let's begin with the text itself, and let's see the way in which Isaac or Zerah tells us about the incident in question. He begins his responsum, and again, this responsum, as you can see here from the title, this responsum is to be found in Rabbi Isaac or Zerah's, I would say, magnum opus, his major book of halachic writing, which is known as the Or Zerah. That's why he comes to be known as Isaac or Zerah, and his descendants also take on that sort of name. It's really a reference to the book that Isaac, his major work of Halakhah that Isaac wrote. Not all of it qualifies as responsa, but in this larger halachic work, Isaac also collected a whole series of responsa that he or his colleagues authored. And this is one of the significant ones. He begins it with this sort of, title or tagline: on the matter of a young woman who was coerced while she was betrothed. And I want to point out here right at the beginning, the Hebrew word that Isaac uses, shene'ensa. Now, ones translates literally as coercion, right? That's why I wrote here the young woman who is coerced. But for those of you who know the way that that term is used in contemporary Hebrew, it is also in contemporary Hebrew, it's used for rape, which is obviously connected to its meaning as coercion. Now, in the halachic context, it doesn't necessarily mean rape, but given the background given the background of these incidents and the halachic issues that we're about to see unfold, I think that is definitely echoing here, right? So although I translated it as coerced, and I think that that's the most straightforward translation of the word ne'insa in this halachic context, definitely the word rape is definitely hanging over here as well. Okay, our master responded, right? And our master here, this is Isaac or Zerah himself. I do not come to dispute the convening of my masters, as I am unworthy. For from your mouths I live, and your waters I drink. Rather, I have come to discuss a matter of halakha and its practical applications before my teachers of notable name. The Kohen, my teacher Rabbi Judah ben Moses HaKohen, of blessed memory, and the old and venerable one, my teacher Rabbi Meshulam ben David, of blessed memory, and the mighty in Torah, my teacher Rabbi David ben Rabbi Sha'altiel, of blessed memory. Now, by the way, these of blessed memories, or in the Hebrew Zetzal, these were clearly added in by later copyists of the responsa, because at the time that Isaac or Zerah himself was writing this respondent, he was actually writing to these teachers that he listed. He was writing to these individuals who were alive and well at the time. Now, what he's going to explain, as we're about to see, is that these scholars that he has just named have already been called upon to render a ruling on this case at hand. And we're about to see how Isaac or Zerah enters the picture, why he gets involved in this case that has already been presented to other significant, important scholars. I just want to note here that Isaac or Zerah himself was, as I mentioned before, at the time of these events, living in Würzburg. Right? He moved around over the course of his life, but at the time of these events, he was a rabbinic authority in Würzburg. The other scholars who he has mentioned here, who he has listed here, who were called upon before he was to render their rulings on this case, were from the Rhineland, right? And we've said earlier that the Rhineland, and that's primarily the communities of Mainz and Speyer and Worms, that was really the cradle of Jewish communal life in medieval Germany. So these are important figures, and these are important figures that represent a very strong halachic tradition and important Jewish halachic learning centers. And he is responding to them. And I will already tell you here at the outset that Isaac or Zerah's response and his halachic ruling on this issue stands in contrast to all of the other scholars whose rulings have survived. Right? So what we're going to be seeing today is Isaac's ruling, that I will also tell you represents the more stringent position. Next week, when we take a look at these other rulings that he has noted, and a few additional ones, we'll see that they represent a much more lenient position on this matter than Isaac himself does. But I hope that by the end you'll understand why I started out with Isaac and the more stringent position. Now, let's continue reading because he's going to tell us a little bit about how he was pulled into this particular dispute. Regarding the case that came into the hands of my masters, for which our heart is saddened, and it is worthy to be distraught and to mourn for the pious ones who were killed in Frankfurt, and happy are they and happy is their lot that they sanctified God's honorable and mighty name with their bodies. And it is well with their souls, for they did themselves good. Now, reading the English here, I tried to translate it as literally as possible because I want you to get the flavor of the Hebrew, but it makes it sound a little bit stilted in the English. What do you think? What do you think Isaac is saying here? Again, he's kind of framing this entire. I think this is important because even though it sounds like it might be an aside, it frames the entire discussion, the Halakhic discussion that he's about to present. What does he have to say here about the incident that occurred in Frankfurt? What did you understand?
If you're dead, you've gone al kiddush Hashem.
Okay, so he's definitely calling those who have, again, these 200 plus people who have been killed in Frankfurt martyrs, or Mikadshe Hashem, as you said, right? He's definitely calling them martyrs. And he's in fact, again, he starts out by saying, we're terribly distraught and sad, obviously, about that incident. But he does definitely, right? He says, happy are they, happy is their lot. Ashrei is the word in Hebrew. Ashrehem, ashrei chelkam. He does talk about martyrdom as a positive thing. And this is very much in line with the general philosophical approach of many of at least the rabbinic scholars of medieval Ashkenaz. Now, I think it's significant that he talks about how they sanctified God's name with their bodies, right? They gave, they gave their lives, literally, they gave their bodies for in martyrdom, right? Again, this community was attacked, but insofar as they died as Jews and they died defending themselves as Jews, he calls themselves martyrs. And he says, so they sanctified God's name with their bodies, and it is well with their souls, right? In other words, the assumption is that their souls went straight to heaven. I think that's what he means here. Now, those are the people who died in Frankfurt. That's his reference to those who were actually killed in the attacks on the Frankfurt Jewish communities. In contrast, he says, and the modest young women were coerced. And again, it's that word ne'ensu. Though their hearts were directed toward heaven, as their end proved regarding their beginning. And it is forbidden to speak negatively of them, and is a mitzvah to speak of them with praise. Now we're going to see why these words, these opening lines of Isaac Or Zarah are so significant, right? Because first of all, I think there's a little bit of a contrast here between those who were killed al kiddush Hashem and these young women who were survivors. Now, he says at the outset, ne'ensu, they were coerced. Now, he doesn't clarify what they were coerced to do. And it's a little bit unclear, and I think purposefully so, right? They were coerced on the one hand, as we're going to hear, they were coerced to convert to Christianity. But as I mentioned beforehand, that word ne'ensu also carries the overtones of sexual coercion. And we're going to see that that also is part of the story. Now, he underscores here that their hearts were directed towards heaven, but the implication is that what actually transpired was perhaps not such a Kiddush Hashem, right? What happened physically to them was not such a Kiddush Hashem, even though their intentions were good, even though their end proves their beginning, even though he says it's forbidden to speak negatively of them, we have to speak positively of them. I want you to pay attention to the ambivalence that I think is contained here regarding the fate of these young women. Now, he goes on to say, behold, I judge this matter before my masters, like a student offering judgment before his masters, and may my masters not consider as transgression on my part, and God, examiner of hearts, knows that I come only to learn Torah from your mouths. right? Now, again, we've seen this before in previous weeks. These expressions of humility on the part of the respondents are kind of typical for the time. Do not be misled by these expressions of humility. I mean, it might have been genuine humility, but Isaac Orzera was a pretty heavyweight scholar by this point in time. So yes, he is writing to and responding to other significant scholars from, as I said beforehand, these old and honorable communities. But he has enough authority and weight to be issuing the response that he is about to do. Now, perhaps the reason that he offers all those expressions of humility at the beginning is because he's about to undercut or dispute their halachic rulings. He says, I'm sorry, I just scrolled down a little bit. I'm picking up from the middle of probably was about the fourth line on your screen. But it seems to me that the court does not have the power to compel this Yaakov to marry his betrothed. Now, I want to remind you again, Yaakov or Jacob ben Joel, Yaakov ben Yoel was the name of the groom, the name of the young man who had been betrothed to this captive woman prior to the incidents in Frankfurt. Right? He says, I don't believe that the court has the power to compel him to marry his betrothed, which already should indicate to you that although we have not seen these other responsa yet, that's what they ruled, right? They ruled that this young man was in the wrong, that in fact he was required to continue with the marriage proceedings. Says Isaac Orzera, I disagree with you. I think you do not have the power, the halachic authority to do that. And as God is my witness, I do not intend to fault the young woman or to disparage her, for it is a great sin to speak negatively of her, and there is great punishment in store for one who seeks to fault her. Right? So don't think that I have any, personal issue with this woman, or that God forbid I'm saying that she sinned. But nonetheless, I don't believe you can force him to continue with the marriage proceedings. He says, just to be clear, know, my masters, that I am the one who prevented this Yaakov, this Jacob, from betrothing another woman. For the matter greatly distressed me when they spoke to me about it several times. For I said, far be it from me to be involved with this matter and with this counsel. Rather wait until the Creator helps her to escape the idolaters, and then consult our masters and the communities. For it is not right to act on so great a matter as this without the knowledge of our masters and without the knowledge of her community. So apparently what has happened, again, if we can piece together the different bits of information that Isaac is providing us with, it sounds like some people, probably from the community of Würzburg, where, again, this Yaakov ben Yoel, the groom or the intended groom, lived, and where Isaac Orzera himself was resident at the time, it sounds like some of them had approached Isaac Orzera while the young woman was still in captivity with the Christians, and had already at that point in time asked Isaac to release the young man from his kiddushin, from his betrothal bonds, so that he could go and marry a different woman. And at that stage of the game, Isaac said, no, I don't think that is, I'm not willing to be party to that. I think that this Yaakov ben Yoel needs to wait and see what happens with this woman who has been held captive. By the way, it becomes clear from other sources that she was held probably for about a year and a half or two until she was able to escape. In any event, at that point in time, he was not willing to be party to releasing this Yaakov ben Yoel. It's quite possible that there was community pressure on him to do so. It's probably not coincidental that he was the one who was approached because he was the local rabbinic authority. At that point in time, however, he said no. But subsequently, what we hear from later on in Isaac's responsa and from the other responsa is that this young man, this Yaakov ben Yoel, against the counsel of the Orzera, had garnered other halachic support and had in fact gone ahead and married a different woman, all the while that his original bride was in captivity and had been mikudeshet to him, right? And had been already betrothed to him with kiddushin. Now, I want to remind you the problem of contracting a second marriage is more severe for women than for men in halachic terms. But this is already post the famous enactment, the famous takana of Rabbeinu Gershom, that prohibits men too from marrying more than one wife. So in going and betrothing a second woman while he was still technically betrothed to the first woman, this young man had certainly broken or flaunted takanat Rabbeinu Gershom, if not, again, he didn't, by betrothing a second woman, he didn't break biblical law and he didn't break Talmudic law either, because those sources do permit polygamy. But he had certainly contravened the takana of Rabbeinu Gershom, which by this point in time was very widely accepted, was considered a very significant thing. In any event, Isaac says, I didn't agree to it at that time, but later, when her brothers, right, apparently after the young woman did finally manage to escape her captivity, she got her brothers to approach the Or Zarua and to try and win him over to her side, right? Now, I want to pause here for just a moment and ask you, right, if we understand the story correctly, and this young man, Yaakov ben Yoel, has already betrothed another woman by the point in time that this young woman escaped her captivity, why do you think she would want so badly to proceed with this original marriage? Why was she pushing it? Right? Why was she getting, all of the communities involved, all of these major heavyweight rabbinic figures involved in censuring the original husband and getting him to continue with the marriage proceedings to her? Which again would have required him to divorce the second wife. Why do you think she cared about it so much, or her family cared about it so much?
Probably she would never be able to marry anyone else.
Okay, so that's a good assumption, I think. Why do you assume that to be the case?
Well, she's an arusa, she has no get.
Okay,
And
so yeah.
and there's no indication of their forcing him to divorce her. And in addition, it would be a confirmation that there was something wrong with her and she would be damaged goods in various ways. And so there would be very difficult for her to marry.
Okay, so those are two important points, right? One of them is that she is an arusa. So until he gives her a get, right, she can't do anything else. She's kind of stuck. She's essentially an aguna. But even if they were to require this young man to, at the very minimum, give her a get, as you say, that there would be a taint that in these communities at that point in time would have carried significant social weight, right? This and I want to suggest that what we already read in terms of the way that Isaac Or Zarua frames this whole thing gives you a little bit of a taste of how, again, yes, he repeats over and over, we can't call her a sinner and it's important not to besmirch her name. But on the other hand, it's very clear that he contrasts this young woman and the other young women who were in her position, who had been forcibly converted and possibly engaged in some kind of, or possibly had been caught up in some sort of sexual coercion as well. Very clear that he contrasts their status with that of the martyrs. And that's, definitely an indication, I think, an accurate indication of the way that at least some people in this community would have felt towards a young woman in this situation. Now, in any event, Isaac Or Zarua goes on to explain that her brothers brought your response. And now, again, he's talking to those scholars from the Rhineland and your letters. And I implored them to show them to me because I wanted to examine them and to include them in my composition, that is my response. But they, the brothers, absolutely refused until with great effort, I convinced them to show them to me on a Shabbat, a short while before the meal when I was able to read them only cursorily and I was unable to examine them at all. And since then, I have contemplated the matter. It's interesting that, just again, he's offering all sorts of, he's couching his response in all kinds of excuses about not having been able to study the others so well, about not having been able to examine them. I don't know if these are excuses for what he's about to rule, or it's meant to kind of protect himself from what he suspected would be significant pushback. But in any event, he says, nonetheless, it seems to me that my masters do not have the power, according to Torah law, to compel this Jacob to marry his betrothed, right? That he had already said beforehand. Now he adds to his betrothed, who is forbidden to him. And I cannot find any dispensation for her. right? So he's already foregrounding his conclusion here. We already hear right at the beginning that he is going to rule stringently with regards to this woman. But he says that's, he's not just offering a stringent ruling, he's going to justify his position. And therefore I came to offer my words before my masters, and begging your pardon, I ask that you write to me with a thorough explanation of your opinions, right? Because again, presumably he hadn't had a chance to study their rulings, and he's asking them to send the rulings to him directly. But nonetheless, he goes on to write an extremely long and detailed responsum, only little snippets of which I have included here. It's a very, very lengthy responsum in which he argues on the basis of many different Talmudic sources that this woman is indeed prohibited to continue with that original marriage. And because she was prohibited to continue with that original marriage, the husband was justified in having married someone else, and the court can't force him to return to the original wife. Now, here, in order to explain, we're not, again, as I said, we're not going to read through the entire responsum, but we are going to read through some crucial parts of it, because what I want to show you this week and next week, as I said, is the way in which these different respondents really cast the whole story differently in accordance with different Talmudic models. So in order to do that, we have to pause here for just a moment and to take a look at one of the critical sources that's going to inform both Isaac or Zeruah's argument and that of his opponents. So let's stop this share for just a moment, and let's go back momentarily to the PowerPoint where I have those sources for you. What I'm referring to are two Mishnayot from Tractate Ketubot, which is the tractate that is about, it's first and foremost about marriage, but it's also about married women's personal status. And in that context, in chapter 2 of Tractate Ketubot, the Mishnah talks about really this concept of a shvuya, of a woman who was taken captive. Now, the Mishnah itself does not exactly prescribe the circumstances of exactly what defines captivity in terms of the circumstances of the capture, but the Mishnah does provide a legal definition or the legal implications of a woman having been taken captive, as follows. If a woman said, Haisha she'amra, I was taken captive, but I am undefiled, mishpeti v'tehorani, she is credible. For the mouth that prohibited is the mouth which permitted, right? So here we have a woman who is coming, and we learn about her captivity, the fact that she was taken captive, only from her own report. There's no external evidence of this. And in that case, in the case where we only know about this incident from her own report, then the Mishnah says we can rely on her. She's considered credible and reliable. If she says, but I am undefiled. Now, just to understand what this means, there seems to have been an assumption that women who were taken captive were raped. And that has halachic consequences that we're going to unpack in just a moment. What this Mishnah clarifies is that if she's the only source of the information that she was taken captive, then we can trust her word when she says that she was in fact not defiled, or right, which in this context means she was not raped, because, and this is a much larger halachic rule that has various applications and implications, the mouth that prohibited is the mouth which permitted, which means, in other words, it's only by virtue of her own report that we even know she was taken captive to begin with, right? We would never think that she was prohibited, or we would never think that there was any kind of halachic problem with her marital status if we had not heard her own report. And so therefore, we allow her to permit herself as well, right, to report that in fact the assumption was not relevant in her case. We're not going to read the rest of this Mishnah, although it's interesting and relevant in different ways. But what I want to introduce here is this concept of an isha shvuya, a woman who was taken captive, because that term or concept stands in contrast to this Mishnah from later on in chapter 2 of Ketubot, which talks here not about a woman shenishbet, not about a woman who was taken captive, but rather ha'isha shenechbesha b'yidei goyim, a woman who was imprisoned by non-Jews. Now, on the face of it, it sounds like this, these are perhaps are two different terms for the same phenomenon. But in fact, halachically, we're going to see that that is not the case. There is a halachic difference and distinction between a woman who was captured and a woman who was imprisoned. Right here, the Mishnah says that if a woman was imprisoned by non-Jews, well, if it was al yedei mamon, that is concerning money, monetary affairs, then she is permitted to her husband. But if it was al yedei nefashot, or for some capital offense, she is forbidden to her husband. Now, there's a lot of things that are somewhat cryptic about this Mishnah, but let's try to unpack it briefly. What might be the difference between a woman who is imprisoned by non-Jews concerning monetary affairs and a woman who is imprisoned by non-Jews concerning a capital offense? What might this even mean, right? We understand that there's a significant halachic distinction, because if it was about monetary affairs, she's permitted to her husband. If it was about a capital offense, she's forbidden to her husband. What's going on here? Who are we talking about altogether? What circumstances might be in the background of this Mishnah's ruling, and what might be the logic? Any ideas?
Typical commerce or economics versus rampages and pillaging.
So who do you think the monetary affairs or the capital offenses, what does that refer to? That refers to...
So I think that the issue here in the Mishnah is that if they're trying to get money and she's been put in prison, a debtor's prison, or to put pressure on her husband, she's much more valuable not raped.
Okay.
Whereas if they're going to kill her, then they have no incentive to keep her whole. And there's no reason for them not to rape her.
Okay. So that's already a step in the direction of understanding the logic behind this Mishnah. So
Yeah.
you're assuming that the capital offense is her own capital offense?
That's how I read it, yeah.
Okay. So that's one way of reading. Another way of reading it that many of the Mefarshim suggest, many of the commentators suggest, is that the monetary offense versus the capital offense actually has to do with her husband.
Yeah, no,
right. So in other words, as you say, if she was
either way.
Right. So in other words, if they're interested, right. So if it was a capital offense that her husband committed, so that in other words, they're for sure going to kill her husband.
There's no reason not to rape her.
Then they don't really care about her, meaning they don't. Right. She's not valuable to them, as you said. And the assumption seems to be, right, as difficult as it might sound to say this, but the assumption seems to be that women who don't have any particular value to their captors can be assumed to, be victims of rape. Now I want to take a step back here though, because this assumes something about the implications of rape to the status of a married woman that doesn't accord with standard halakha, right? Because normally speaking, and there's another Mishnah that I did not bring for you here, but which demonstrates this. Normally speaking, a wife, a married woman who is raped is not, meaning assuming that it was rape, assuming that she had coercive sexual relations with a man who was not her husband, normally we assume that that is not problematic for the status of her marriage. It's obviously terrible for herself and for her husband and for everyone around. But we do not normally assume that it has legal implications for her marriage. And as a matter of fact, another Mishnah, there's a Mishnah elsewhere in Ketubot, which says very clearly that one of the clauses a man is supposed to write into the Ketubah when he's marrying a woman is, if you are taken captive, I will redeem you and take you back as my wife. Right? Now, again, if the assumption is that women who were taken captive were raped, then what he is supposed to write into the ketubah is, I will take you back as my wife. That will have no implications for the continuation of our marriage. The only married woman for whom an incident like that would have legal implications for her marriage is the wife of a Kohen, because that same Mishnah says that a Kohen writes something slightly different into his ketubah. What he writes is, I will redeem you and return you to your father's home, which suggests that for a Kohen, because of his sort of priestly ritual status, even coercive sex with another man would render his wife prohibited to him, that is, not permitted to continue with marital relations. And so therefore he's obligated to redeem her and return her to her father's home. But it's very clear from the Mishnah that for the wife of a non-Kohen, that is not the case. So now let's look at our Mishnah right over here, because this is going to be critical to us. What does this mean, right? If we say that a woman was imprisoned by non-Jews, even if we go with your explanation, right? If she was imprisoned for some capital matter, so that she didn't have particular value to her captors, and the assumption is she was raped, why would the Mishnah here say that she's forbidden to her husband? That doesn't accord with the halakhah that we know from elsewhere, right? Even a married woman who has been raped or can be assumed to have been raped should not become forbidden to her husband from a halakhic perspective.
So the plausible way to explain the Mishnah is that they're considering the possibility that she was willing, that
Okay,
it
so that's
wasn't technically rape, and that would be relevant to the case for the Orzarua, because if she was an issue of conversion, or that, as he writes, that she saw all these other people being killed, and so she decided to go along. So it could be that he's suggesting, and reading this Mishnah here, as saying that if she agreed, even though there was some coercion, I mean, okay, it wasn't like she went out to want to do it, but nonetheless, there was some.
okay. So you are suggesting the way that Isaac Orzarua reads it, but before
Right.
we get to, and yes, you are absolutely correct. Before we get to that, I want to suggest a simpler reading, which is that perhaps, and this reading is in fact the suggestion of Rabbeinu Hananel and other medieval commentators. What if we were simply to read this entire Mishnah as speaking about the wife of a Kohen? Right? As we said just a moment ago, the wife of a Kohen is in fact prohibited to her husband if she has been raped. So maybe this Mishnah, Ha'isha, who is the focus of this Mishnah, is the wife of a Kohen. And in support of that, look, the very next sentence in the Mishnah is, if a town was overcome by besieging troops, all women of priestly stock found in it are ineligible. But if they had witnesses again that nothing happened to them, then even a slave or even a bondswoman, even if the witnesses were people who are normally disqualified from giving testimony, then they may be believed. Right? So look, the continuation of the Mishnah talks about Kohanot, talks about the wives of Kohanim. So maybe we can just simply say that this entire Mishnah is about the wives of Kohanim, and then we've resolved the issue. Then we understand why the Mishnah says, Al Yedei Nefashot Asura LeBa'ala, if it's for some capital offense, she's forbidden to her husband. And again, that's the suggestion of several medieval commentators. The difficulty with that again, that's a neat way of resolving the problem or avoiding the problem. the difficulty with that reading is, in fact, what I just pointed out, that the continuation of the Mishnah refers explicitly to Kohanot, to the wives of Kohanim, which would kind of suggest that the generic Ha'isha, married woman, is probably not the wife of a Kohen, right? Because otherwise the Mishnah would have called her a Kohenet as well. But if we say that the woman, the Ha'isha, the generic woman, is not the wife of a Kohen, but the wife of any other Jew, then we really run into that problem that we've spelled out. And the way that it is resolved by other medieval commentators, Rashi among them, is to suggest that, in fact, just as you said, what we imagine is not a situation in which she was entirely coerced into this sexual relation with her captors, but rather one in, even though obviously the entire context is a context of coercion, nonetheless, that the sexual act is one that entailed some agreement or submission on her part, which would already turn it technically, and this is a very difficult thing to say, but it would already, from a technical halakhic point, or at least from some people's reading of the halakhic rules, would already turn it into an act of acquiescence, into an act that was not rape, but a consensual one. And if a married woman has consensual sex with a man who is not her husband, then she does indeed become prohibited to return to a sexual relationship with her husband. Now, I want to go back. We have just a few moments for today. Again, we are going to continue this next week. And I want to ask you to these are difficult topics, but to bear with me because we are going to see very different takes on it next week. Before we do that, though, I do want to quickly take a look at the way the Or Zarua himself articulates this. Excuse me. So let's just quickly get back up the responsum for this week. One moment. There we go. Okay, so let's just read this next paragraph in the responsum. In chapter Ha'isha Shenit Armela, that's Ketubot chapter 2, the Mishnah teaches, and this is the Mishnah that we just read, if a woman was imprisoned by non-Jews concerning monetary affairs, she is permitted to her husband. For some capital offense, she is forbidden to her husband. And Rabbi Shmuel, we don't know who this is. It's possibly the Rashbam. It's unclear. The Rashbam's commentary has not survived. Maybe that's who he's referring to here, though. Rabbi Shmuel interpreted in chapter Ein Ma'amidim, which is Avodah Zarah, that when it teaches for some capital offense she is forbidden to her husband, that refers to the wife of a Kohen who is forbidden even when coerced. And this is again, I cited it in the name of Rabbeinu Hananel, but that's the interpretation. The reading of the entire Mishnah is a reference to the wives of Kohanim. But we do not suspect the wife of a non-Kohen, who is not forbidden when coerced, only when she is willing, and she is permitted to her husband even in capital offenses, like the wife of Ben Dinai, as the Talmud explains in chapter Ha'isha. I'm going to jump a sentence ahead. 2 sentences ahead. There's a discussion here of Ben Dinai that I don't want to get into right now. That is the case. I jumped ahead several lines. I hope you can see where I am at the end of a line in the middle of the page here. That is the case in which the wife of a non-Kohen is permitted to resume relations with her husband. For since she knows that she may be saved, due to that possibility, she does not appeal for sexual attentions. But here, says Isaac Or Zarua, and here means in our case in Frankfurt, where we have established that the young woman in question, saw that the attackers had killed scores of them and defied the king and burned his palace. And in the very palace of the king, they killed them, right? This is a description of the events that occurred in Frankfurt. And she herself was about to be killed, and she was forced to accept their religion. We may say that although her heart was directed towards heaven, she appealed for sexual intercourse in order to save herself from death. And even though she does not enjoy this intercourse, for she did not appeal to her captor out of sexual desire, and she takes no pleasure from this intercourse, nonetheless, because she appealed to him to take her and to do as he wished with her, she is forbidden. Right? And these are difficult words, and this is not based on knowledge of what actually happened, but rather a typological reading of the case. He says, we know what happens around. We don't know exactly what she herself did, but we can assume that given the circumstances of these riots and attacks on the Jewish community in Frankfurt, she assumed that she would be killed, and assuming that she would be killed, right? So it's like a case of capital offense. And under those circumstances, we can assume that she would have done anything, including offering sexual favors to her captors as a means of trying to save herself. And once we make that assumption, then we have to relate to her not as a woman who was raped, but really rather as a woman who voluntarily engaged in sexual acts with her captors. And he goes on to say, and again, there's sections that I've cut out here, but he goes on to say, it does not make sense to me to say that because she accepted their religion, therefore they treated her as a non-Jew and did not degrade her and treat her as an abandoned woman, since the average non-Jewish women are treated like abandoned women and they are not ashamed. And this is some pretty harsh anti-Jewish rhetoric here, right? He says that, if they treated her, even if they had turned her into a Christian, that doesn't protect her, because we can assume this is the way they treat Christian women as well. On the contrary, from the moment she accepted their religion, they acted crassly with her, and she was constantly terrified of defying them, and they defiled her. And even before she was convinced to accept their religion, they defiled her, for there is opportunity to have intercourse even when they come to destroy and wreak damage. Therefore, it seems to me that even according to the interpretation of Rabbeinu Shmuel, she is prohibited. And these are some pretty harsh words here. I see that our time is up for today. But I just want to underscore here, right, that I invite you to continue reading this section of Isaac Or Zarrua's ruling, that he states in very straightforward and, again, at least to me, difficult to read terms, that we have to assume that this woman, because of the circumstances in which she found herself, would have willingly engaged in these acts. And because of that, she is forbidden to resume her relationship with her again betrothed. She is forbidden to return to her marriage proceedings. In other words, what the Or Zarua has done here is cast this woman as the Talmudic type of nechbesha al yedei nefashot, a woman who has been imprisoned for a capital offense, who is assumed to have acted in this manner. We're going to, again, pause here for today. What we will do next week is to see, I'll summarize these things for those who lost the train of thought here. But what we're going to see is that the other respondents cast this woman as a very different type, a different Talmudic type, and thereby come to tell the story in a very different manner and to rule halachically in contrast to what the Or Zarua has done here. Okay, so I do ask you for next week to please, if you can, bring this text back. I'll have it available again as well, and we'll add some additional layers to it. Okay.
Okay, so thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you to everyone who joined us, not only here on Zoom, but also on Facebook. Just a few announcements before we say goodbye. Drisha's 25th Annual Rappaport Memorial Lecture is on Sunday, April 7th at 12 p.m. Rabbi Silber will be teaching on the topic of the Seder ritual and the formation of community. To sign up, you'd go to rappaport.drisha.org. Also, Mishnah in Depth will continue with Nazir and Sotah starting April 7th with Rabbi Avi Wolfish. The class will continue to meet on Sundays starting at 1:30 p.m. Eastern on the 7th and at 1 p.m. for the rest of the series. So just that day is 1:30 p.m. And with that, I'll say goodbye and see you next time. Lehitraot.
Bye-bye.